Hi everyone, thank you for joining me in today's episode of my Beginner's Guide series, and as always, thank you for being very patient. I've been sick and busy, and I just now had time to really sit down and work on this video thoroughly, so I hope you guys enjoy it. If you missed the last episode, I did a gear breakdown, so I talked a lot about gear recalibration and the high-end gear, exotics, and classifieds, and how to get those, and how to recalibrate them and stuff, so check that out if you haven't had time to do that yet. Today's episode is going to be all about the weapons in the game. I'll be doing a tier list for not only the weapon talents, but the weapons themselves. I'll also be talking a little bit about optimization in this episode, because I did not talk about that at all in the last episode, which I really should have. Just kind of slipped my mind, so I'll talk a little bit about that as well. I had someone ask me a question in the last episode in regards to my pistol, and since I'm starting off with the sidearms, now's a great time for me to explain that. If you're using a lower leveled weapon, the stat requirements for that weapon's talents are going to be lower, but it will still reap the same reward. The sidearms are a great example for this because you don't use your sidearm much for actual firefights, but you can benefit greatly from using their talents passively. The best way to utilize your sidearm is to use the talent Cool-Headed. This talent will give you a 5% skill cooldown reduction on headshots you land, and if your sidearm is a lower level, the requirements to unlock Cool-Headed are going to be lower, so you can pretty much use Cool-Headed on any kind of build that you want to run. Lately, I've been using Cool-Headed and Trained for my sidearm, as the headshots will grant me 5% cooldown reduction, and Trained will give me 0.1% signature skill reduction, allowing me to get my ultimate back much faster. There's definitely other talents that you can utilize, such as Predatory, Sustained, or Determined. You will see a lot of people using the double-barrel sawed-off shotgun, and you don't necessarily have to go to a lower level, because if you're using talents like Predatory, odds are you already have a lot of stamina anyway. So the sawed-off shotgun is going to have a good amount of base damage to unlock Predatory on the majority of the enemies that you come across. Also, before I get into the tier list, you'll notice that there are some weapons that are similar in type, such as the Snub-Nosed Rhino, the Rhino, and the Rhino Special, also the Officer's M9 and the Military M9. There are other weapons like this in the game too, but you should know that almost all of them are exactly the same, and the difference is in appearance only. The only difference I've ever noticed are in some of the sidearms and the SMGs, but the only difference has been the magazine size. I was unable to confirm if the base damage is different. I'm still working on that, but that being said, the difference in the weapon types, if there are any, are very microscopic and should not really be the deciding factor if you would like to use the weapon or not. Alright, without further ado, let's get into the actual tier list. So since I am using Cool-Headed and Trained, I personally like to use sidearms that have a higher rate of fire and a decent magazine size. I think I'll make this easy, and I'll just start off with my personal favorites, and that is going to be the custom PF45 and the first wave PF45. I'm going to be placing these pistols into S tier. They have a high base magazine size as well as a really good rate of fire, and you can equip them with all of the weapon attachments. So these ones are definitely my favorite ones to utilize the Cool-Headed talent for. Also, the X45 and the First Wave X45. I'll be placing these into S tier as well. They kind of remind me of a 5.7. They have really good rate of fire, they allow all of the weapon attachments to be equipped, and they actually have some pretty decent base damage as well. There are sidearms in the game that have really good rate of fire, but they do not have weapon attachment slots. A great example of this is the Military M9 and the Officer's M9A1. I'm going to be putting both of these pistols into A tier. The rate of fire on these guns is really good, but they only allow a muzzle attachment to be equipped. Their base magazine size is okay, but I would like to have the option to make it a bigger magazine size if I can. I actually use a Military M9 on my second character because I have not made a different pistol for that character yet, so it's still a good option, but it's not my first choice. Another sidearm that's almost exactly like these are the PX4 Storms. I'll be placing these in A tier as well. The PX4s definitely have high rate of fire and some decent damage output as well, but they only allow the muzzle to be equipped, just like the M9s. Moving on to the first B tier sidearm that I'll be doing is the M45A1. The M45A1 has a slower rate of fire, but it actually has pretty good accuracy and reload speed, and it allows all of the weapon attachments to be equipped. This one's still a solid choice, but I prefer something with more rate of fire. The next one that I'll be putting into B tier is the 93R. The 93R is one of the more unique sidearms in the game. It is a semi-auto burst pistol, I have not tested cool-headed with the 93R before. I would imagine it works exactly the same, but the fact that the recoil on the 93R is so crazy, it makes it almost not worth it to use, so I'm going to be putting it in B tier for that reason. Moving on now to C tier, I'm going to be putting the M1911 and the tactical M1911 in this slot. These guns both have high damage, but they have really slow rate of fire. However, they do allow weapon attachment slots to be equipped, so they're not a terrible choice. But considering I like sidearms with higher rate of fire, these ones are pretty much the bottom of the barrel for me. All of the remaining weapons, like the Magnums and the Rhinos, I'm going to be putting them into D tier. My reasoning for that is the really low rate of fire, as well as the reload speed, and the fact that you can't put weapon attachments on most of these. On some of the Rhinos you can, but not enough to make them any good. But if you are looking for your highest damage outputters, all of these are pretty much going to be the best option. Moving on now to the shotgun portion of the tier list. A lot of these are going to be a little biased because shotguns hold a special place in my heart on this game, but after they implemented the RPM lock, I think in like 1.8 or 1.7, they made them not very reliable to use, so I don't really use shotguns anymore aside from the showstopper, but I'll still go over each of these and where I would put them into the tier list. And again, as far as the weapon types, all of these weapons have the exact same stats, same mag size, same accuracy, stability, everything, as far as the actual weapon type. But there are going to be a couple differences that I will pinpoint. I'll start off with the SASGs. The Tactical and the Black Market and the SASG-12 all have the exact same stats. The only difference is the SASG-12 does not have a foregrip attachment, and for that reason I will be putting it into C tier. However, the Tactical and the Black Market SASGs I will be putting into S tier. My reasoning for that is these shotguns have really good accuracy, excellent rate of fire, and their damage is pretty crazy, especially if you're using builds specifically dedicated to shotguns. I never really used the M870s too much, but from what I understood, they were really good when Sentry was popular, and Lone Star, they're pretty popular with Lone Star as well. All of the M870s have the exact same stats, but they obviously look a lot different. I personally think that the Military and the M870 Express look the best, so I'm going to be putting them into A tier. However, I don't understand why the custom M870 MCS looks so weird to me. I just cannot get behind it. I understand that it looks like a Remington M870, but I just don't like how it looks in this game. I'm going to be putting it into B tier strictly for appearances only, but as far as stats, they are exactly the same. Along with the custom M870, I will be putting the double barrel sawed-off into B tier. The double barrel sawed-off is technically a sidearm, but it is classified as a shotgun in the game, and it is a pretty reliable weapon. I just don't use it hardly ever anymore. I used it a lot on console, so if you're just looking for a really reliable sidearm with pretty good base damage when you're up close, it's a great option. I just don't use it very much anymore. However, its counterpart, the actual double barrel shotgun, I'm going to be putting into D tier. I pretty much never use this shotgun. If you're going to use a double barrel shotgun, I would almost recommend just going straight for the exotic Cassidy shotgun that you can buy inside the terminal. It's much more fun to use. As far as the Super 90s, all of these hold a very special place in my heart. They all have really good rate of fire and crazy damage. The rate of fire is just a little bit less than the SASGs, but the damage is a little bit more. So in my opinion, the Super 90s have been more reliable. For appearance reasons, I'll put the Marine and the base Super 90 into S tier. I think these two look the best, but the Tactical Super 90 still looks great, still an awesome weapon. I'm going to be putting that into A tier. So this is my shotgun tier list. Okay, moving on to SMGs. Looks a little crazy right now, but it'll look nicer once I start getting it onto the list. I'll start with ones that are definitely no good. So the Burstfire MP5 is a 3-round burst SMG, and it has the exact same stats as the MP5 ST and the Navy MP5. The only reason that this gun is no good anymore is because of the RPM block that they implemented in, like I said, either late 1.7, early 1.8, I can't remember. This gun used to be like on top, you would see everybody using this, but now it's just not good anymore after the RPM lock, considering it has the same stats as the other two, so I'm going to be putting this one into D tier for that reason. However, the Navy MP5 ST and the Navy MP5N, these ones are some of the top SMGs. They have great base damage, great rate of fire, so I'll be putting them into S tier. I'll talk about one that's a little more controversial for me. So the Police UMP and the Tactical UMP and the converted USC. On paper, these are guns that I would normally put like into D or C tier because they have really low rate of fire, but their base damage is really high. Maybe it's like a nostalgia thing to me because I used to use the UMPs all the time with Predator before the classifieds came out. I would use the tactical or the police UMP. These guns, they look and sound really good. I love the way they look. I don't know what it is. I do not like the converted USC at all. I don't like how this one looks. I think it's the barrel and the stock just makes it look kind of funny to me. I know that it's a little controversial considering everything else I've put on these lists so far, but for the police and the tactical UMP, I'm going to put these into A tier. And I actually do not like how the USC looks at all. I'm going to put this into D tier. As far as I know, though, these guns have the same stats. So if you're wanting to just go for the stats and not so much how the weapon looks, then there's still great options. Another set of weapons that is a little bit more controversial for me are the AUGs. So the Enhanced AUG and the AUG A3 Parrot. I love how these guns look. And originally when I started making this tier list, I was thinking that the rate of fire on these guns was slow, but when I went to the game, they're actually not bad. They're a little bit more reliable, kind of like the MP5 STs, and I just love how these guns look. I love how the long barrel is, and in general, AUGs in most games are favorites to me. So I'm going to put these into S tier, and for appearance reasons only, I'm going to put the tactical AUG A3P into A tier. Exact same stats as usual. I think it's just the barrel on this one. I don't like the short barrel. But in general, the AUGs are really good guns, which I thought they had slow rate of fire, but they're actually not too bad. So they're really good weapon choices. Okay, so I'm going to touch on one that I actually saw a difference in as far as the weapon types, and it is involving the vectors. So not only does this gun just look so ugly without a stock, turns out it actually has a smaller mag size as well, which I guess makes sense because it obviously looks like it has a smaller mag. As far as I know, the weapon damage is the same, which doesn't make any sense to me. You would think that it would do more damage, but it does not. As far as I know, I could be wrong. When I was trying to compare these, I was basically looking at my blueprints, and the only blueprint I had for this was like a really low level, and the Vector 45 was like one level higher, so I can't use that as an example because it could be that the blueprints were making the difference in the base damage. I was going to put the tactical vector into D tier already just because it just looks so ugly. But considering it has a smaller mag size as well, that's a bit more justified for putting it there. So I'll be putting the tactical vector into D tier. However, these two vectors are awesome. I love the way they look. I love the Vector 45 ACP more. But both of them they look great. They have good stats. I'm going to put them into S tier. The converted SMG9s, I never use these guns. They also don't allow a foregrip attachment to be used, which is kind of crucial for SMGs because you're missing out on a lot of crit damage. The only ones that I would consider are the Hilder Air exotics, which I don't really use those either, but if I were to use these, I would use those instead. And I actually did not have these on my PC account, so I can't show a video showcasing those talents yet. I'm still working on farming for them. I've only found the air so far. The SMG9s, as they sit, I think they have pretty good stats. Their rate of fire is pretty good. The base damage is pretty good. It's just that you're missing out on that crit damage. And they look kind of funky to me anyway, so I'm just going to throw them in B tier because they're not the worst guns to use, but they're definitely not the best ones either. Also, the PP19s, as far as I know, both of these have the same stats, they allow the same attachments, they both have the same static talent of Hurried, which Hurried is a really good talent. I will go over that later when I start talking about the talents. Really high magazine size, base magazine size, and then if you want to use Hurried, you can make your reload speed a lot faster. I guess it's just the way these guns look, how they sound. Not too fond of them. There's definitely better options, but they're not the worst choice, so I'll go ahead and put them into B tier. A lot of people like to use the PP19s with a defense build, which that's not a bad option. And the police and the black market T821, again, as far as I know, the stats on these are exactly the same. I think the black market T821 looks a lot better than the police T821, but they're basically two sides of the same coin. I'm going to put these into C tier. I hardly use them, but in some situations, they're really good. I have seen some people use them with their defense builds, but there's definitely better options out there than these two. But these guns, if you can get this gun in survival, you're set. Because the high base damage on these is pretty good. And finally, moving on to the MP7, this gun is king. Always has been, always will be. Really high rate of fire, really good base damage. It's an absolute monster, so the MP7 is going to go into S tier for me. And that wraps up my submachine gun tier list. Moving on to the Marksman rifles, I'll go ahead and cut it short right now, and I'll start with these ones right here. The SOCOM MK20, the MK17, and the Military Scar Age. I really wish these guns were good, but they just aren't. They don't shoot very well, they have really, really shitty accuracy and really shitty stability, even though on paper it says that they do. They just, I guess it's like the accuracy, like the reticle does not come fast enough to the center. So unfortunately I'm putting these into D tier. The only time I'll use these is if I'm using the Tenebrae exotic, which I'll go over that later when I do the exotic list. Other than that, I never use these guns. They're just not reliable. You have to use like specific weapon talents or weapon modifications to make them work, and at that rate you're sacrificing, which you shouldn't have to. So unfortunately I'm putting these into D tier for that reason. Next I'll do the SRSs. These guns look really good, and they have a lot of weapon attachment modification possibilities, but the fact that they don't have the greatest base damage for a bolty is what throws it off for me. If you're going to have a bolt action rifle, you need to have high damage, and these ones just don't. So I'm going to put them into C tier. As far as I know, the stats on these are exactly the same, but if you're going to run a bolty, you should have one that has high damage, and these ones just don't. Moving on to the M1As, the SOCOM and the classic M1A are probably my favorites amongst the two, but they don't allow a foregrip weapon attachment, which can be kind of a deal breaker. Although they already have some pretty good accuracy and stability, you should always have like a foregrip attachment slot available, and these ones don't have that. But the fact that they have high base damage and pretty good rate of fire, accuracy, stability, I'm going to go ahead and put these two into B tier. The first wave M1A, it looks really good. It allows for all of the weapon attachments, so this is a really good gun to use with Deadeye. However, I've been using this one a lot recently, and I've noticed that the accuracy on this is not very good. Or maybe it's like the optimal range on it isn't very good. I just feel like my reticle's on the targets and it's just not hitting them. So I guess for that reason, I'm going to also put it into B tier. I feel like the fact that it has like weak accuracy, but the fact that you can put all of these weapon attachments on it kind of cancels it out. My favorite amongst these is probably the classic. I just like how the classic M1A looks compared to the other two. But they're all pretty much the same. It's just that the first wave M1A allows you to equip more attachments on it. And the Paratrooper SVDs, both of these are really good. They have crazy accuracy and stability. They have pretty decent damage, and the rate of fire on them is nuts. I'm going to put both of these into S tier. And as far as I know, the stats on these are exactly the same. And now we're getting into the bolt action rifles. So a lot of these have the static talent of elevated, which I believe are the M700s. I'm pretty sure these three have the elevated talent. I do not think these three have them. The elevated talent is probably one of the best ones that you can have for a sniper. It basically increases your weapon damage if you're above 1 meter from your target, and I think it's by like 12%. So already that one is already unlocked all the time, is better alone than Competent. Competent gives you 10% more weapon damage after you use a skill, and when you're using a sniper build, odds are you don't have the greatest skill haste, so you're not always going to have your skills on cooldown. For the model and the tactical M700s, although these guns have really great damage, they're missing on weapon attachment slots. For that reason alone, I'll put them into A tier. However, the M700 Carbon, you can put all weapon attachments on, and it's actually probably the best sniper in the game as far as damage to weapon attachment ratio, so this one's going to go into S tier. The custom M44 is also a great weapon as far as weapon attachment to damage ratio. This one is also going to go into S tier for me. When you're playing survival, crafting the custom M44 in the Dark Zone is like one of the first moves that you should make. It's going to have the absolute best damage output in the sniper class for survival. And the highest damage outputters are going to be these two, the Huntington and the classic M44. As far as I know, the stats are the same. Obviously, the Hunting M44 looks the best in my opinion, but they both have the same of everything else. Both of these are going to go into S tier for me. Because if you're running a bolt action, you should definitely have some damage. It does not matter if you cannot have weapon attachments put on, which these ones Obviously, you can only put on a sight and a muzzle, but these ones have regardless, they have the highest absolute damage output that you can put. But if you are using Deadeye, I would recommend one of these two instead, or anything up here, because these ones allow more weapon attachment slots. So the fact that you can put more weapon attachments on, it lets you put more crit damage into those slots. So I would definitely choose these for a Deadeye build. But if you're just using like a regular like Hexo build, I would use these for damage outputters. And this wraps up my Marksman rifle tier list. Alright, this is definitely going to be the longest episode in the series, but that's good. I want to have some time to go over all these with you guys. So, moving on to the assault rifles. A lot of you guys already know which ones are the best ones, but I'll just start off with the easiest ones. So a lot of you guys already know that the lightweight M4 and the LVOA are the absolute best assault rifles in the game. So I'll just go ahead and throw those in the S tier right now. Very, very, very reliable guns, high rate of fire, high base damage. The LVOAC is probably the best looking gun in the game. A lot of people don't understand that the police M4 actually has the exact same stats. I do think that the recoil pattern is different, so I think a lot of people obviously choose the lightweight or the LVOA for appearance reasons, which is obvious because they look great. Some of my personal favorites are the P416s. Both of these have the same stats, and they actually look great. They remind me a lot of the M4s. They just have a little bit slower rate of fire, but they have a higher base damage. So I'm going to put these into A tier. Another set of higher rate of fire and high base damage weapons are the G36s. These ones have a higher base damage and lower rate of fire than the M4s, similar to the P416s. So I'm also going to put these into A tier. I actually don't know the ratio between the P416 and the G36s. I don't know the ratio for those guns at all. But I would say for appearance reasons that the P416s look better. That's just my opinion, though. Some other guns that I've been messing around with lately are the ACRs. The ACRs have some higher base damage, but the rate of fire is a lot slower. But for some reason, I just find them more reliable. I don't know if they have like some more stability or what it is, but I've been enjoying the ACRs lately. I'm going to put them into B tier. The SA-58s, there's the Tactical Military and the Classic FAL. All of these are burst round guns, which, as we already know from some previous guns, I don't prefer these anymore, so I'm going to put them into D tier. It's too bad that these guns aren't very good, at least anymore, because they look awesome. I love how these guns look, but unfortunately they are not very good in this game. So the AKs, I go back and forth on quite a bit, but usually my consensus on the classic AK is the same because I just think it looks ugly with no attachments. I'm going to put the classic AK into D tier, strictly for appearance reasons. However, the Black Market AK is one of the better looking assault rifles in the game. Mostly what it comes down to is I don't like how they put the weapon attachments on the AKs in this game. They always put it on the front rail, and it makes it look really dumb, unless you use like a really big scope, which makes it look even more dumb. So when we're talking about appearances, I put them very low on the scale with the attachments on. But as far as the stats, the Black Market AK is a pretty decent gun. It has really high base damage, and just a lower rate of fire. I'm actually going to put this into A tier. I was using the Black Market AK for a while with Striker, and it was actually a lot of fun. But obviously I have not used AKs in a long time, specifically for the stats. The military AK as it sits, I'll put it into B tier. The Scars, these have like a lower rate of fire and a higher base damage. Their recoil pattern is kind of all over the place. So the only time I'll use these is if it's the exotic variant. I'll put these into C tier for that reason, for the fact that their recoil is just all over the place and they're not very reliable. I'm also going to put the MK16 into C tier as well, because the rate of fire is just really slow, and I think it might have around the same stats as the Scar. That was actually a lot easier than I thought, so this is my tier list. I would put these guns into A tier, all of these like into S tier. There's just no room for that, obviously, and I think it makes more sense this way to clearly indicate that the ones in S tier are much better than the other ones in the game. Moving on to the LMGs, I'll just start with the ones that you pretty much first think of when you think of an LMG, which are the M60s. There are 3 different versions of them. As far as I know, all of these are exactly the same. M60s have a pretty high base damage, and they're really good stability but low rate of fire, which if you're using like an LMG dedicated build, that rate of fire is probably not going to be a big deal for you. It just kind of depends on if you're doing like a run and gun version or if you're doing a cover-based version. For a cover-based LMG, the M60 is very reliable and packs a really big punch. I'm personally going to be putting them into B tier. For me, they basically sit right in the middle for reliability. If I'm going to be using the M60, I would rather just use the Hungry Hog exotic. For the talent, obviously makes up for the majority of what the M60s lack. For the RPKs are a really great run and gun LMG. They basically have the same stats as the AKs, but they obviously have more RPM, a bigger mag size, and longer range. The AKs are a bit more accurate with better stability and faster reload speed. But if you're using like a run and gun, let's say like a Lone Star build, the RPKs are great. And I also prefer how the RPKs look over some of the other LMGs in the game. Simply for the fact that I don't use these very often, I am going to be putting them into C tier. And I personally think that the classic and the military RPKs look much better than the black market RPK. I don't know why the black market RPK just looks silly to me. If you are looking for something more run and gun, the custom L86s are some of my favorites. These ones look really cool and they have high RPM and really good accuracy. It's just that their magazine size is low, but if you're using this with a classified Lone Star build, usually the magazine size does not matter. So I'm going to be putting the L86s into A tier. Moving up a little bit, the S tier LMGs will be the Infantry MG5 and the MG5. These ones are pretty much the equivalent of like an MP7. Their rate of fire is insane. And after that, we have the military MK46 and the M249s left. Both of these pretty much have the same stats. I'm just going to put them into D tier. The rate of fire is really slow, and overall they're just not as reliable as some of the other options. And this will wrap up my LMG tier list. Alright, to our final weapon tier list, we have the exotic weapons. Some of this might be biased, but for the most part I think most people will agree for where I put these. So I'm going to start off with like the obvious good ones, which the very first one I'm going to pick out of the hat is the House. The House is probably the best exotic in the game. The House has a talent called Card Flipper, where basically half of the magazine has like 20% increased damage, and then the card just flips halfway through. That's pretty much all it is. So for half the magazine, you have 20% increased damage. If you're coming over from the Division 2, the House birthed the apartment, if that makes sense. Yeah, so the House is the best exotic, hands down, in the game. For the next one, we have the Showstopper. The Showstopper is an obvious S tier weapon. Striker builds are pretty much religiously using the Showstopper. The Showstopper, I can't remember what the talent's called, but essentially your accuracy increases with every shell that you fire. So it's just an ASC, and the reticle will get smaller and smaller as you fire. Very, very reliable gun for pretty much any build that you would like to use. The next one that I'll do is the Big Al, or the Big Alejandro. This one has like a 1100 RPM, it has really good stability. It's like the best cover-based weapon that you could fire. Very, very reliable. It's also going into S tier. Let's see. I'm going to do the Bullfrog. The Bullfrog is also... This one was like a high-end weapon to start out. And in 1.7, I think they remade it because people were kind of abusing its third talent with Alpha Bridge. Basically, it has a base damage increase of 12%. And this bonus decreases anytime you put accuracy or stability mods on. But the weapon is just crazy. It has crazy rate of fire. Like you don't need accuracy and stability mods for it, although they do help because the recoil is kind of crazy on it. But using that one with like Striker or really any build is just crazy. A lot of people still like to use it with Alpha. Moving on now. I don't want to do just A tier. So I'm going to start with the Devil in the Heel next, because these ones, I actually have not, the only time I've ever used these talents are on console, and that was years ago. They look amazing. I love how these guns look. They're clearly like an RSAS. But I just don't know if they're any good or not. And considering just reading the talents on them, they look so overwhelming to use that I feel like it's almost not necessary to use them. At some point, I would like to mess with them, but considering I don't have them right now on PC, I'm still trying to farm for them. It's hard for me to say. I'm going to put them in D tier. That's mainly because I don't know how they are. But from what I've read, a lot of people just say they're trash. But I still want to try them for myself. So if you have these and you're not sure if they're any good, I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. Hopefully I'll have an updated list one of these days and I can come back to these ones. But while we're in D tier, I'm going to throw this piece of trash in here. The pecan. Looks badass, but the talent is awful. It's basically every kill you get will increase the next magazine size by 20%. It's not good at all. Also, while we're down here, I'll throw the Golden Rhino in here. This one has like a 200% stagger effect, but it's a Golden Rhino. I mean, it's not very good. Defiler as well. The only reason I'm putting the Defiler here is because it's only like this one was like a pre-order weapon or something, but it only goes up to like gear score 200 or some shit. Like, you can't use this, you can't get this later on. It's dumb. It also looks exactly the same as the Cassidy, but it's just a sawed-off version. The Cassidy itself, though, I'm going to put into B tier. This gun's actually really fun, especially with Lone Star. If you use two of them, you can swap between, and it'll instantly reload. And the Cassidy it fires both barrels instead of one, so it's definitely a lot of fun to use, and it has, like, crazy stagger on people. But I would say nowadays it's probably not worth using. Let's see, the Historian is one of the ones that you can buy in the base of Ops, and it does not drop anywhere else, I don't think. The talent itself, it's like, it embeds a bullet into the target that explodes like a second later, and that second embedded bullet is like 200% of your total firearms. So I think it's pretty good with like Deadeye, or if you're just using like any kind of marksman rifle build, as long as your firearms are like stacked up. It looks really good too. I'll put it into B tier. I haven't used it in a while, but I'm sure it's pretty good. It used to be pretty good. The Urban MDR, so if you guys are coming over from Division 2, the Urban MDR was the first time we ever saw a weapon of this variant, like how this gun looks. In Division 2, it's like a base weapon. It's one of like the base rifles, but in here it was like an exotic, and it's the only one of its kind. And the talent's pretty good. It's like 18% increased weapon damage against status affected enemies. Really popular to use like with Predator or what's the other? Sentry. Sentry is another popular one. You just throw headshot mods on here. And I like the way this gun looks too. I'm actually gonna put it into A tier. The popular way to get that one was like in survival. It was like only possible to get in survival caches for a while until they finally opened up the loophole at the end of the game. I'm gonna do these two. These ones are trash. The Tommy gun and the Thompson. This one they do increased hipfire damage, but the hipfire in the game's bad now, so are these guns ultimately. For a while you could only get these in the Dark Zone through supply drops, but they opened it up so you can get them anywhere now. I don't even think they look that good, honestly, so I don't like them. The Warlord, the talent on this one's actually pretty good. A lot of people would use this with Classified Nomad, because you take 20% less damage while you fire the gun, and then after that you take that damage back when you're done firing. Although I don't like how the classic AKs look, I think the recolor on this one's pretty good, and the talent's pretty good too. I'm going to put it in B tier. I never used this though, but the talent itself is pretty good. The Liberator and Centurion, to my knowledge, how it works is every shot fired with the Liberator adds like damage to the Centurion, and then kills with the Centurion increase your rate of fire for all weapons for however many seconds. The only reason that I'm going to be putting these two into B tier is because it's a Liberator and it's a lightweight M4. Otherwise, I think the talent is just too situational and complicated. You can try it out yourself and see how it goes, but just in general, I don't think these two are like anything to write home about. I'll put them into B tier though for that reason. They both look really good. So, Hungry Hog, I'll be putting into A tier. This one is, I think you get 20% increased damage for every kill until you stop firing. So this is, again, really good. If you throw, like, Meticulous on here, that's, like, the best case scenario, or you can just run it with a Lone Star build, and usually the Lone Star buff will last for a while. So this is great to use, for that reason. It's mostly like a solo kind of gun, though, in my opinion. As much as I want the Medved to be good, it's just really not. Basically, it just turns a spread into a slug. It just turns this into a slug shotgun. But the name is cool. It looks amazing. I really wish this gun was good, but it's just not. I'm going to put it in C tier strictly for the fact of how it looks, and the name of the gun is, like, elite level in my opinion. But if it weren't for that, I'd be putting it into a D tier. Along in C tier, I will be putting the Midas. The Midas does, it's like a stack of 20% less damage to whomever you're firing at, meaning the person that you're firing at takes 20% less damage, but meanwhile, you also do 20% less damage. So this is definitely not for a damage outputter. This is more for like a healer build, in my opinion, or some kind of support build. Back in the day, I used to see people using the Midas like in a team in the Dark Zone, but very, very rare that you ever see this out and about anymore. The Tenebrae, I'm going to put the Tenebrae into B tier. This is one of the few exotics that I come back and use regularly, just because I feel like it's kind of fun. It looks pretty cool. Essentially, whenever you destroy a weak point, it resets yours and your teammates' skill cooldowns. So I used to use this on console quite a bit in the Dark Zone. Whenever we were like running manhunts and we were running by some cleaners or something, I would pop this out and use it. But that was like 1.7 era. So obviously you don't see anybody using this kind of stuff anymore. The Hilder in the air, for the talent alone, I'll put this into A tier. The guns themselves, obviously you can't put any kind of attachments on them to make them better. Like as far as the foregrip, they lose out on that crit damage. But basically, stacks with the Hilder, or shots stacked with the Hilder, increases your critical hit damage with the air. So you can kind of swap between these. The talent itself is really good. I haven't used them in a while, but for that fact alone, they're pretty good. I'll put them into A tier. I'm also going to put the Caduceus into A tier. It's great for healer builds. Critical hits will heal your teammates. I think it might be for the amount of damage done. I can't remember. But, I mean, if you're not, as a healer build, you're not doing too much damage anyway, you might as well just use something that's going to benefit your team, which the Caduceus does. And it looks pretty good, too. I would rather use this variant than the base Scar variants. But this is going to wrap up my exotic tier list. Okay, now we're on the weapon talents, and I've already put them on the list where I want them to be. So now I'll just give you a description on the talent and why I feel that I put it in that tier. The first talent that I've listed into tier D is Dominant. Every kill performed while your signature skill is active reduces the cooldown of your other skills by 10%. This one is just way too situational. It's very rare that you will specifically pop a tactical link just to reduce the cooldown of your other skills by 10%. I would rather go with something that is going to benefit all of my skills at once, and Coolheaded does this already. So yeah, Dominant is definitely a bottom of the barrel talent, in my opinion. The next one is Skilled, and Skilled will reduce your signature skill cooldown reduction by 5% on headshot kills, and this talent can go on pretty much any gun, but there's already better talents than Skilled, and I think Skilled is just kind of a waste of a weapon talent, in my opinion. Definitely another one that's at the bottom of the list for me. The next talent is Trained, And I've been using Trained on my sidearm as a secondary talent with Cool-Headed just because it can help bring your ultimate back a little bit quicker. But it's definitely by itself not a great talent. And Trained will reduce your signature skill resources by 0.1% on critical hit. So definitely not terrible as a secondary talent, but I would only use it as a secondary talent to Cool-Headed. And this one is only available on sidearms, shotguns, and marksman rifles, so that already makes it less consistent. The next two talents are Toxic and Harmful. Toxic is blind, Harmful is bleed, and each of these have a 15% chance to apply those status effects to the target. And I think you can only put them on sidearms and marksman rifles. The only one that might be somewhat useful is Toxic, but it's definitely not. I would say it's only useful in like survival or something, but if you're just doing it for like everyday gameplay, it's not the greatest talent to use. Yeah, I've yet to find those talents useful. If anything, Harmful is actually less useful than any other talent because it actually counters like a lot of other classified builds like Predator. So I definitely would not put these talents on your gun if you can help it. The next one is Ambusher. This one is the static talent on the UMP and the USC. It's the third free talent, and you cannot roll it onto any other weapon. This one will increase your damage by 10% against targets that are in cover. So already the fact that the target is in cover, that's very situational. By the time you get close enough to use the SMG on them, they are probably out of cover by now fighting you, so it's a waste of a talent, in my opinion. And I just actually went over and edited the wiki because for some reason on the wiki it said that it was a target out of cover, but that's not true. It's in cover. I don't know if the talent used to be like that. I'm not sure, but I did recently change that, so it's correct now. All right, moving on to the C tier. The first one I've listed here is Intense. And Intense, the first bullet that's out of the magazine has a 25% chance to apply burn. This one's definitely a lot better than Blind or Bleed, and this is one of the only talents that you can unlock onto like an all-electronics build, because it only requires 2800 firearms, which for the most part you have that all the time. You can also put this one on assault rifles, so this one's already better than the other two. It's also a really good talent if you're running a Firecrest build, just because you'll have that extra way to put your targets on fire. The next talent on C tier is Proficient. The first bullet shot when out of combat has a 50% chance to result in a critical hit. This one's not terrible, but there's definitely talents that kind of do the same thing that are actually better. So I'm going to put this one in C tier just for that reason. This one is only optional on sidearms and marksman rifles, obviously. So the next talent is Self-Preserved. And critical hits with the weapon that has Self-Preserved rolled will heal the user for 3% of the damage dealt. I've tried this one on a few different builds, and the only one that I've deemed it like okay on is a defense build, because at least you're getting some other sort of healing. But it's so small and microscopic that it's not even like, you might as well just run a defibrillator that slowly heals you over time, because it's basically doing the same thing. This one also requires a little bit of firearms and stamina to work, but for the most part, you're going to have this talent unlocked all the time, so it's just one of those small talents to where, like, if you're stuck with it, it's not the worst one, but it's definitely not the best one either. The next talent is Focused, and Focused is the static talent on the G36 assault rifles. When no skills are on cooldown, your weapon damage is increased by 10%. This one's not terrible, especially if you get it in like survival or something, but I wouldn't like roll this onto your weapons if you can help it. If you get a G36 and you get one of the top talents is really bad and you want to roll that talent instead of Focus, that would be fine. But I mean, for the most part, out of habit, you're going to be using your skills, so Focus is going to be not useful for the majority of the time. For that reason, also the reason that it requires electronics if you roll it somewhere else, because this one, it actually is possible to roll on other weapons, and it's only possible to roll on assault rifles, not LMGs or anything like that. Moving on to Tier B. The first one I've listed here is capable. Using a skill improves the handling of your weapon for a couple seconds. I can't remember if it's 5 or 10 seconds, but this one's not like the worst talent that you could have. If it's between this one and something else that's worse, I would definitely keep this one. It's very useful for like LMGs or snipers, and if you guys are coming from Division 2, you know what weapon handling is, but if this is like the first time you guys have played Division, your weapon handling is essentially all of the components of gunplay, so reload speed, stability, accuracy, things like that. Your handling is going to improve all of that stuff for a period of time. Capable is really good with LMGs and snipers, in my opinion. So it's not the worst talent to use, but it's definitely not the best one either. The next one is commanding. I originally had this talent like at the bottom of the list because it's such like it's one of those talents that you get all the time and you never really know what it does. And I've recently been messing with it and it's actually kind of fun. So every kill performed while your signature skill is active extends the duration by 20%. If you guys use the tech support talent, this is basically the same thing, except this is for your ultimate. So it's really fun to use with the tactical link and like resistance and stuff. If you can get commanding rolled on the bottom of your weapon, or if you just have a build where you can make it work, because this one does require both electronics and firearms to use. And it can be equipped onto any gun, sidearms, SMGs, assault rifles. But yeah, this one's pretty fun if you can make it work as a bottom talent. I would just like to recommend like another weapon with like determined on the bottom if you're going to actually make it work, or you can just use cool-headed, I guess, to get it back quicker. But yeah, commanding's actually pretty fun. I've listed it in a B tier for that reason. The next talent is swift, and this is one of those where it's like if you're stuck with it, fine, but I wouldn't like specifically roll this on any of your guns. This just makes your reloading 25% faster with that weapon. This one does require both firearms and stamina to use, but for the majority, you'll probably have those unlocked anyway. Definitely not a go-to talent, but it's not the worst one to have either. The next talent is balanced. With balanced, you'll acquire maximum accuracy faster when shouldered. This is only for marksman rifles. I originally did not care much for this talent at all, but on console, this was like a godsend most of the time if you're running a sniper build against players, because you have to be pretty quick when you're shouldering the weapon, and sometimes that reticle takes forever to get to the center. And balance was pretty fun, honestly. It just kind of makes gameplay a lot faster, it seems like. So, this is one of those where it's like I wouldn't roll it specifically, but if you have it, it's not the worst talent to have either. The next one's accurate, kind of the same deal as swift. This one just increases your accuracy by 25%. I mean, these talents are unlocked all the time as long as it's on the weapon, so it's not terrible that you would have these. Accuracy is best on LMGs and shotguns, I think, but you can put it on any gun in the game. And it only requires a low firearm roll to make it work. Well, 3,800 firearms to make it work. The next talent is Meticulous. I find that Meticulous works best on LMGs, but basically anytime you kill a target, there's a 25% chance it'll instantly refill the magazine. I like to have Meticulous rolled pretty much all the time on the Hungry Hog, so you can constantly have that 20% bonus after killing a target. But the downside to this one is that it does require firearm stamina and electronics, but they're all really low rolls, so it requires 2874 firearms and electronics and a 3800 stamina roll to make it work, and it can be put on any of the guns in the game. So, for the most part, Meticulous is mainly useful for LMGs, and not many other weapons would benefit from this talent. And the last talent that I put on here is Expert. Expert is the pistol talent that's pretty much on any single pistol that you pick up, and it deals 100% more damage when the target is below 30% health. So it's actually all in all, I mean, it's a pretty like neutral talent. It's pretty good, but you're not really using your sidearm too often. So I do want to make a pistol build here coming up. I have like a couple ideas in mind. So I will make sure to like keep expert on there, and I'll probably roll like brutal as a different talent. But yeah, this one's definitely not too bad. It's not like the worst talent in the game or anything. Moving on to tier A, the first one I have here is elevated. And this one is only for snipers, but it's the static talents that are on the bottom of the M700s. And it increases your damage by a certain percentage when you're elevated more than a meter above your target. This one's almost always unlocked, so it's a great talent to use for the snipers as the bottom talent. I would recommend this over competent, because competent, while it's a great talent, you're almost never going to have your skills all the time. So it just makes more sense to run elevated instead. And the fact that it's already given to you free on the bottom talent gives you more room to roll prepared and brutal, or deadly and prepared, or whatever you want to do on the top talents of the gun. And speaking of prepared, that's the next one I have on this tier list. Some of you guys, if you're coming from Division 2, already kind of know what this one does. But this one increases your damage when you're just more than 30 meters from the target. In Division 2, the gun talent depends on how far away you actually are, and it will like increase your damage based off that number. But this is like period when you're over 30 meters, it's a base damage of 15% extra. And it's not only for marksman rifles, you can also roll this on LMGs and assault rifles. So it's a pretty good talent. I like it a lot. The next one is Disciplined. I prefer Disciplined over Proficient, because this one, after you kill a target, the next shot you fire is an automatic critical hit. I've been messing around with the build. Instead of Deadeye, I'm using a 3-piece Deadeye, which gives me more marksman rifle critical hit damage, and I get to keep my headshot bonus on top of that. So using Disciplined, Brutal, and I think I have Elevated as the third talent, but you could even mess around with Deadly or Prepared to make it even more powerful. I've been having a lot of fun with that build. Instead of running a 4-piece Deadeye, I feel like it actually hits harder this way. And I almost always have Disciplined unlocked, because the gun hits so hard that the only time that I don't have it is if I miss my target. The next talent on this list is Destructive. This is a pretty good talent, especially in PvE. This just increases your enemy armor damage by 15% on that weapon. It's useful on any weapon, or you can roll it onto any weapon, but it's primarily useful on assault rifles, since the base assault rifle bonus is always enemy armor damage. But really, I would just roll Destructive on any kind of gun that you're using strictly for PvE and you're a damage outputter. Destructive is kind of a go-to. And speaking of PvE, we have Ferocious. This one increases your damage against named and elite enemies by 10%. The only downside to this one is that for whatever reason, you have to have some electronics on your build as well. It's an equal number of firearm stamina and electronics that are required. So this is mainly a bottom talent kind of gun, unless you're running Alpha Bridge. But it's very rare that you're running Alpha Bridge for PvE, unless you're running the 6-piece, I guess. But Ferocious is... I put it so high on the list because it's a pretty high number to give you. If your build is specifically dedicated to PvE, there's kind of no reason that you wouldn't have this on your gun. So if you have this as a bottom talent on like a striker build, it's kind of insane how much damage and how fast you can melt named enemies. The next talent I have on here is Sustained. I originally had this one towards the bottom of the list, but the more I thought about it, it's a really good talent to have. You kind of want this as a secondary talent for like a sawed-off shotgun if you're using Predatory. But when you kill a target using Sustained, it increases your health by 6%, so it gives you 6% of your total health back in healing. It's a pretty good talent to have, but I wouldn't make it a priority over others. I would just make it like a secondary useful talent to use, primarily on a sidearm of some kind. Or the best case scenario, if you're running a striker build, like a 6-piece classified striker, if you're using the Showstopper, you can do Sustained on that. Like if you're stuck with Sustained and something else, I would just keep Sustained because it's a good talent. The next talent I have on here is Adept. I originally had this one in tier B, but the more I thought about it, this one was just a lot of fun to use, especially in 1.7. And it's definitely not a bad talent, it's just that it requires electronics to use. So it's a good bottom talent, or if you're using... Alpha Bridge. This is one of the best ones that you can put on there if you're running a crit build. Adept gives you 7.5% critical hit chance for 15 seconds after you use a skill. So this is excellent to use with Competent. Right after you use a pulse, for example, or the booster shot, this instantly gives you 7.5% for 15 seconds, and that's a pretty lengthy amount of time, especially if you're running against players. And the next one on here is Fierce. Fierce is also a critical hit talent, but this one just increases it by 5% base. You don't have to do anything to have that unlocked. It just always has 5% unlocked. All right, we have made it to the S tier of the weapon talent tier list. And of course, the very first one that I've listed here is Cool-Headed, which gives you the skill cooldown reduction by 5% on headshots that you land. So this one already is an excellent talent. It deserves to be S tier. The next one is Predatory, and Predatory will give you health back over 20 seconds, and it's 35% of your total health. So this is excellent to run on your sawed-off shotguns, or just as a secondary weapon to give you your health back a little bit over time. The next one I have listed here is Brutal. Brutal will increase your headshot damage for any kind of weapon. You can roll it on any weapon. I can't remember if the base damage is 10 or 12%, but it's something in that range, which is already pretty excellent to use. The next talent is Determined, and Determined will reduce skill cooldowns by 7.5% on after you kill a target. And you can put this on any gun, but it does require a high electronics roll. So this is usually good as a bottom talent, or if you have a somewhat of like a tactician build going on, you can probably have it unlocked on the top talent, but it also requires a little bit of firearms as well. So you're probably going to be running this on the bottom of your guns the majority of the time, or if you have a lower gear scored weapon, you can have it on the top. The next talent is Competent, which I've already talked about a couple times on here, but essentially your weapon damage is increased by 10% for 15 seconds anytime you use a skill. This one does require both firearms and electronics, but the firearms roll is very low. You'll probably always have the firearms unlocked for this talent, so it's just the electronics you'll have to worry about. The next weapon talent on the list is Talented, ironically enough, and killing a target with the weapon that has Talented rolled will increase your skill power by 15% for 20 seconds. This effect does not stack, and killing a new target will refresh the timer. So this is excellent for skill builds, or if you're just running some kind of hybrid like skill power build with your like a critical hit chance damage build or whatever. This one does require high electronics obviously to use and a very low firearms roll. So this one's excellent to use. It's a pretty much must-have for any kind of skill build. Like if you're running a sticky bomb build, you should always have Talented unlocked. These next two talents kind of work hand in hand. So Vicious will increase your critical hit chance by 10% while you're at full health. And Unforgiving is the next talent, and this one will increase your actual damage done the lower your health is. And it works by the health segment. So if you're missing one health segment, you'll do 10% increased damage. But if you're missing two health segments and you're on your last health bar, you'll do 25% increased damage with that weapon. Both of these require 4790 stamina to use and a low firearms roll, so you'll probably have these unlocked almost all the time if you're running a high stamina build, such as Striker or Predator and stuff like that. It's pretty rare that you're gonna not run a weapon with one of these on it. A lot of people like to have both of these on one gun. I personally like to have Vicious Deadly on one gun and then Unforgiving Deadly on another. Just kind of depends on the build and what I'm feeling like. And speaking of Deadly, I'll just do that one because I just talked about it. But Deadly just increases your critical hit damage by 15%. This one's kind of a must-have for a lot of builds, and it does not require very much firearms to unlock it, so you'll have Deadly a lot throughout your builds. The next weapon talent that I have on the S tier is Hurried. Hurried is pretty underrated, but basically it increases your reload speed on critical hits. So this is amazing to have on SMGs. If you run this on like the house or something, people are going to get really overwhelmed. Like when you're fighting against players, they're going to be overwhelmed with how fast you actually reload as long as you're hitting your shots. And the last talent, and my personal favorite talent in the game, is responsive. Has like the best logo out of all of them. This is the Hammerhead Shark. This one increases your damage by 10% when you're closer to the target by 10 meters. This one does require quite a bit of firearms and a little bit of stamina to use. So you're probably not going to have this talent on top all the time. You'll probably see it more often on your bottom slot. But back in the day, like 1.7, everybody was running like hybrid builds. So responsive was almost always on one of your top 2 slots. This one's equipable on sidearms, ARs, SMGs, and shotguns. So you'll see this quite a bit on shotguns that drop as well as assault rifles. But that wraps up my weapon talent tier list. So I'm going to briefly go over optimization real quick because I haven't done it in the last couple episodes, and it's really straightforward. So you can go to this optimization station in the terminal, and using credits and division tech, you can basically make your items to the best of their ability. And you can see that there's a lot of these that I either can't or I've completely done that already, so I can't. But basically this raises the gear score of your items to their maximum gear score. So I'll go ahead and I'll do both as an example. So your weapons will always require credits and division tech as well as your gear to optimize. And it's always going to cost 50 division tech, and it's only going to raise by a small amount. So keep in mind that if you're going to be here for endgame content, you'll have to pretty much farm division tech a lot to upgrade your gear and your weapons to their best ability. So I'll just choose something here. I'll go ahead and do this one because I use this M4 a lot. I want to make sure that it's the best that it can be. So I'm going to select the item, and it's going to tell you that it's going to change your loadout, but that's okay. You're just making the gun better. That's on the loadout. So you hold down your optimize button, and it takes 250,000 credits and 50 division tech, and it optimizes it by a small amount. So you can keep doing it. You can sit here and just optimize your stuff until you're out of division tech or whatever, or until it's fully optimized. And these ones are fully optimized here, so you can see that the maximum number is 1401, max armor and everything, and the gear score is maximum at 293 on the classified sets. Same deal here, 50 division tech, 250,000 credits. Optimizing it will change a loadout, and boom, it is optimized. So this upgrades everything besides the mods that are attached to it. Your mods can never be upgraded, unfortunately. You have to farm for good mods in this game, but everything else, the armor, the stats, the attributes, the gear score, all of this can be changed and be made better. And when you're out of division tech, you will have to farm for division tech. I'm going to make a video farming division tech, and just so you can see what are the best ways to get it. But yeah, that's pretty much it for optimization, and that's it for this video, actually. This video was very long. It went on way longer than I thought it was going to, but it's good. I wanted to sit down and get it finished, and I feel a lot better having it finished because now I can focus on other content for you guys. So if there's something in particular that you're wanting to see, please let me know in the comments. I just recently finished Falcons Lost on Heroic by myself yesterday, and I'm so mad because the content did not save properly on my computer. I don't know what happened. But yeah, I finished it solo yesterday, so I'll probably do it again, and then I'll make a video on that for you guys to see. And then maybe I'll try some other incursions solo too, the ones that are possible anyway. But yeah, if you guys have any questions or recommendations for next videos, please let me know in the comments, but I will talk to you guys in the next episode. Thank you so much.